Boldwood presents The Wagging Tails Dog's Home, written by Sarah Hope and read by Laura Kerman. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Chapter 1. Ginny looked around the small room. The overhead light flickered before plunging the room into semi-darkness. The small slither of a window above the kettle only enough to illuminate the silhouettes of the large table and those around it. "Didn't I tell you? I said the bulb was going to go, didn't I?" Susan, a volunteer in her mid-50s, shook her head and made her way towards the kettle. "Anyone for a cuppa?" "2 minutes, Ginny, and I'll have light in here again." Percy brushed his snowy white beard, patted Ginny's hand and stood up. "Good idea, Susan. Tea break and then we'll get on with discussions." Flora gave Ginny a smile before pulling Ginny's notebook towards her and squinting at the scrawled plans. "You've done well. If we can implement everything, this should be the biggest and best family fun day and dog show we've ever had." Blowing her hair out of her eyes, Ginny gripped hold of the large sheet of rolled-up paper. Every single time she headed staff meetings, something happened. Last month, it had been fleas. Yes, fleas. Alex had found one on Bertie, a small West Highland, and with the extent of his panic, anyone would have been forgiven for believing the world had ended. The time before, Susan's estranged ex-husband had let himself in and declared his undying, and very much not reciprocated, love for her. Maybe one day she'd actually be able to finish a staff meeting without any drama. "I agree with Flora. Your plans sound amazing." Susan yelped as the hot water missed the cup and splashed across her knuckles. "Are you all right?" Flora stood up. "Oh, it's nothing a little cold water won't fix." Susan dismissed her concern with a wave of her hand and ran the cold tap, plunging her hand into the freezing water. "Yes, well, it just feels as though there's more at stake than ever, so we need to try and attract more visitors, more prospective adoptees, and more cash-laden tourists." Ginny looked around the room. She didn't need to tell the people in here how much was riding on this one event. Of course, the fundraising for Wagging Tails Dog's Home never stopped, but their summer family fun day was the one day of the year they were guaranteed to bring in more money than all of their other fundraising efforts put together. Funds they desperately needed to keep the ever-increasing number of dogs in their care homed and fed. "We will." Susan placed a steaming mug of tea on the table in front of Ginny. "I hope so. I did the inventory yesterday, and we've not even got enough money to cover the electricity bill next month, let alone to buy enough food and build those extra kennels we need." "It'll be fine, Ginny. We always find a way." Flora took a long sip from her mug. Looking across at Flora, Ginny could tell she was as worried as she was. Flora just had a way of covering it up, making everyone believe that everything was fine, but Ginny knew. She knew what was at stake, and she wasn't about to let anyone down, least of all Flora and the dogs who relied on them. Tim, a student volunteering as part of his college course, cheered as Percy turned the light back on. "There you go, Ginny." Percy binned the old light bulb and took his seat again, nodding to Susan as he picked up the mug she'd left there for him. "Thanks." "Right." Ginny slid her mug to the side and unrolled the paper she'd been clutching. "I've sketched out the 2 paddocks and done a quick map of where we could position everything. So, I've got the stalls all around the outside of the bottom paddock, with the agility pen in the middle, and then the food stalls, live music, and pens for the dog shows up in the top paddock." She circled the top paddock area with her finger. "That's a good idea. Make people walk through the stalls before they get to the main area." Wrapping a damp tea towel around her hand, Susan sat down. "They're more likely to see something and spend if they've got to walk through it." "That's what I thought. Plus, the more the stall holders make, the more likely they're going to book another stall for next year." Ginny tapped her pencil against the plans. Flora nodded. "Or for the Christmas market." "Yes, that's true," Ginny grinned. If they could make a success of the fun day, Particularly if they could pull in more people from the local community, the Christmas market might just attract more visitors than it did last year. Ginny shuddered as she remembered the pitiful number of visitors. Not that she could blame them. The moment the last stall had finished setting up and Percy had taken residence in Santa's grotto, the heavens had opened, and within 10 minutes the paddock had been turned into a floodplain. What they really needed was to hold the market inside somewhere. Maybe the answer would be to hold it in West Parr Village Hall. Ginny? Shaking her head, Ginny tore herself from her thoughts and focused on the job in hand, the family fun day and dog show. Sorry, Susan, I was miles away. Right, so we've already got some stall holders who have signed up. Elsie's Bakery, Carrie's booked a stall to sell her pottery, and I think she's going to have pottery painting sessions too. The lady who sells the crystals, but obviously we need a lot more vendors. Terry's column in the Tresto Telegraph usually attracts more stall holders, and I can go through the list from last year, see if I can encourage them to sign up again. Flora scribbled on a post-it note. Good idea, Ginny nodded. Why hadn't she thought of that? Has Terry been in touch yet? Shouldn't he have started writing his column already? Twisting in his seat, Percy pulled a newspaper from a pile on the work surface behind him. He smoothed out the crumpled paper and flicked through it. He usually has. Should have been published a couple of weeks ago. It's not in there, I've already looked. Flora tucked a loose strand of greying hair into her bun. He's normally rung by now, too, to arrange a visit. I've emailed him at least 4 times, but I've not had an answer yet. I really should get round to calling him. Good idea. Percy folded the paper. Has Clark agreed to do the dog training demonstrations? Yes, I rang him a while back now and he's coming. He said... Ginny pulled her phone from the back pocket of her jeans, the shrill ringtone distracting her. Glancing down at the name, Jason, scrolling across the screen, she frowned and pushed it across the table. Everything okay? Touching Ginny's hand, Flora nodded towards the phone. Ginny smiled and shook her head. Yes, fine. Where was I? Yes. Clark told me he's planning on shortening the length of the agility course so he can fit more taster sessions in. Oh, that's a good idea. I know last year there were quite a few people who didn't get to try it out. Susan peeked beneath the tea towel covering her hand before flinging it across the room, where it landed on the pile of towels and dog bedding stacked up in front of the washing machine. I know little Dylan from the village was disappointed he didn't get to take his Jack Russell Pixie across the course. Yes, so that should work well. Ginny silenced her phone as it rang again. They're persistent, aren't they? Do you want me to answer it, put on a gruff voice and scare them away? Tell them that you don't need double glazing or another phone contract or whatever it is they're trying to sell. Percy nodded towards Ginny's phone. You? Scare someone away? I don't think you've got a bad bone in your body, Flora chuckled. Oh, for you lot I could, Percy grinned, raising his eyebrows. I don't doubt it, but unfortunately it's not someone from a call centre. Ginny shifted in her chair. It's Jason. He's moved down here, and now, because we're living within 30 miles of each other, he thinks we should reconnect. Jason? The sap who broke your heart? Didn't you move down here to put some distance between you? Flora wrapped her hands around her mug and frowned. Yes. He's just moved to Tresto. Yuck. Well, don't you go letting him back into your life. Heed my advice. Look at me and Dean, Susan said as she held her hand against her chest and grimaced. Me giving him a second chance was clearly the wrong decision. Oh, don't worry. I have absolutely no intention of getting back with Jason. You know me. I'm happy as I am. Romance is for wimps. I certainly don't need a man to complete my life. Blowing a loose strand of her hair from her eyes, Ginny pulled her notebook towards her again. Once bitten and twice shy, as her mum would say. She'd had her heart broken once, and she would not make the same mistake again. Ginny, your soulmate will come into your life when you least expect it. Percy patted her hand and leaned back in his chair, glancing across at Flora. Ginny bit down on her bottom lip, forcing herself not to reply to him. Percy was the last person who should be giving advice on love. It was clear to everyone but Flora how Percy felt about her. But what was the point if he was never going to build up the courage to tell her how he really felt? Just because Percy had found his soulmate, even if she was none the wiser, it didn't mean there was someone out there for everyone. Percy's right, Ginny. Even after my experience with Dean, I refuse to stop believing I'll meet my one. Susan scrolled through her phone and held the screen towards her. I can help you set up a profile on one of these dating apps, if you like. I'm sure a girl like you will be inundated with potential matches. Nope, I don't need anyone. I like my life, and besides, I don't have time for anyone. She squirmed in her chair. They needed to get back to planning the family fun day. If there's nothing in tomorrow's paper, I'll ring and talk to Terry and see what's happening. Good idea, Flora nodded, moving the conversation on. He might have plans for a double-page spread at the weekend or something. I'm sure there'll be a reason why he's not put out his usual column. Hello? Anyone here? A voice called from the reception area. Oh, drat. That'll be Tim's tutor. She's meeting to discuss how he's getting on. I completely forgot. Quickly downing the last dregs of her tea, Flora stood up. I'm really sorry, Ginny. I'm going to have to go and speak to her. You've got some fantastic ideas here. Maybe we can catch up again after. That's okay. I think we're more or less done. Ginny checked the clock and began to roll up the hand-drawn map. I need to take Jarvis to the vet's anyway. Chapter 2. Ginny watched as Tyler, a young Springer Spaniel, bounded to the other end of the paddock in pursuit of a ball she'd just thrown. She glanced down at her phone. 6 minutes and 47 seconds she'd been on hold to the Tresto Telegraph. It was a good job she didn't have a breaking story to report, or their journalists would be the last ones to know. Good job, Tyler. Well done. Drop. She fussed over his silky, floppy ears and carefully extracted the ball from his mouth. One day you'll surprise me and actually drop the ball, eh? Smiling, she threw the ball again before wiping the sticky saliva down the front of her jeans. This was Tyler's happy place, the paddock. After living in a family home and getting all the attention in the world, he'd had a hard time settling into life at Wagging Tails, and she didn't blame him for it. She picked off a stray piece of fluff from her jumper and pocketed it. He'd ripped his bedding apart again last night. Again? You want me to throw it again? She ended the call, deciding to try the newspaper offices in person instead, and tucked her mobile back into her pocket. She needed to pop into town on her lunch break to buy more treats for Tyler anyway. There was a particular brand his family had left with him, which they didn't have at the home. You're one gorgeous pup, do you know that? And one day, very soon, the perfect family are going to come along and snatch you up. The spaniel pawed her knee, leaving a smudge of mud on the denim of her jeans. They will, and you'll go off with them and have the best life. She wiped her eyes. It was stories like Tyler's that really got to her. She threw the ball again. After 4 years working here, she knew she should be used to it by now, used to how cruel humans could be. But Tyler's story was different. He'd been loved and cared for, part of her family. And when he'd been dropped off, she'd never had to console an owner as much as she had done with Tyler's family. But with a family illness, money troubles, and their home being repossessed, and having to move in with friends, they'd run out of options. Ginny had seen how difficult the decision to give Tyler up had been for them. This is where you're hiding, then. Turning, Ginny saw Flora shut the gate behind her before joining her. Tyler trashed his pen again last night, so I thought it best to let him run off some energy. Oh, did you, pet? Flora fussed Tyler, his whole body wriggling from side to side with excitement as he wagged his tail. You'll find your family soon. That's what I told him. Ginny grinned. I couldn't get hold of anyone on the phone at the paper, so I'll pop in on my lunch break and have a word with Terry. Maybe we can ask him to feature Tyler's story first. I think that's a great idea. With any luck, he'll have streams of people ready and willing to adopt him. Everyone loves a spaniel. Yes, hopefully. Ginny bent down again and fussed him behind his ears. Right, I'd better get this one back, and then I'll take Frank and Dinah on their morning walks. Alex will be pleased. He's about to clean out their kennel, and you know how Frank gets with him." Laughing, Ginny clipped Tyler's lead to his collar. "Are you sure it's not the other way around? Poor Frank just wants a quiet life, and when Alex goes in all cheerful and singing at the top of his voice, it just rubs him up the wrong way." "I think you may be right there." Flora picked up the abandoned ball, turned and began to walk back with Ginny. "And hey, I was going to say that I'm here if you need to talk, all right?" Ginny looked down as Tyler paused to sniff at a clump of grass. "Thank you. I know, but I'm fine." "That's good then, just as long as you know I'm always here if you need me." Flora pulled the gate closed. "I do, but I really am okay." She was fine. Yes, her breakup with Jason had left her in pieces, but that had been 4 years ago now. She was over him. And once he got the message that she wanted nothing to do with him, whether he was now living in Tresto or not, the better. Biting down on her bottom lip, she paused and waited for Flora to catch up. She owed Flora so much. She hadn't just given her a job when she had moved down here. She'd shown her patience and care. She'd helped her put her life back together. She was only worried because she cared. "We had some more blankets and things dropped off this morning." "Oh, really? That's great." Patting the back pocket of her jeans, Ginny double-checked she had the photographs Susan had given her of the dogs eligible for adoption, before pushing the heavy glass door open. The foyer was bigger than she remembered. The large reception desk was positioned in the middle of the 2 lifts, and a group of not-so-comfy-looking chairs were huddled by the window to the left. If she remembered correctly, the offices for the Tresto Telegraph were positioned on the top floor, level 3. There would likely be a reasonable explanation as to why Terry hadn't begun his column to promote the Family Fun Day yet. Flora might be right. He might be planning an eye-catching double-page spread to kick off his regular column. Something just didn't feel right, though, not to Ginny. No, she was glad she'd come here. Reaching the top floor, she paused to catch her breath before shaking her hair from its messy bun and securing it again. She peered through the glass pane in the door. Grey partitions separated small cubicles, each housing someone dressed in a suit, with a computer and a coffee mug. She looked down at herself and grimaced. Maybe she should have changed out of her muddy jeans and crinkled pink T-shirt. She shrugged. She didn't need to impress anyone. Terry was lovely, and had always been an advocate of Wagging Tails. He certainly wouldn't care what she was wearing. She pulled open the door and stepped into the general hubbub of chatter, keyboards clicking and phones ringing. "Can I help you?" A woman sitting behind a reception desk to Ginny's left waved her over. "Hi, I've just come for a quick chat with Terry. Could you point me in the direction of his desk, please?" She frowned as the woman tilted her head before laughing. "Terry Bennett? Short, bald, a wardrobe full of threadbare woolen jumpers?" The woman clicked a long red fingernail against the surface of the desk. Had his jumpers been threadbare? Ginny shrugged. "Yes, Terry Bennett." "He's long gone, I'm afraid." The woman picked up a stack of papers and stood up, the conversation apparently over. "Gone? Where's he gone?" "Spain, France, a remote island off the top of Scotland." The woman sighed as the phone began ringing. She picked it up and tucked it between her shoulder and her ear before glancing back at Ginny. "I've no idea. He retired 6 months ago." Retired? He hadn't mentioned anything when he'd visited last year. Surely he would have told them, told Flora. "Who's taken over his job?" Raising her eyebrows, the woman nodded towards the back of the office. "The one in the corner." "Right, thanks." Ginny made her way through the office and tried to ignore the stares from people on phones, from those scribbling in notebooks or tapping away on keyboards. As she neared the cubicle the receptionist had indicated, Ginny smiled. A man in a sharp grey suit was sitting hunched over his keyboard, squinting at his computer screen. He may not be Terry, but at least he looked professional. She walked up to his desk. "Hello?" Frowning, the man looked her up and down before turning back to the computer screen. Clearing her throat, Ginny tried again. "Hello, I understand you've taken over Terry Bennett's job?" He turned slowly and looked at her again, an expression of irritation flashing across his face. "I have." Ginny sighed. First impressions could definitely be deceptive. She held out her hand. I'm Ginny Stevenson. I work at Wagging Tails.Dog's home. Ignoring her hand, he turned back to his screen. Hi, Ginny. Now, if you don't mind, I'm just in the middle of something. Ginny narrowed her eyes. Hadn't he been taught any manners or even basic social skills? I do mind, actually. I should be taking the dogs out, training them, and trying to rehome them. Instead, I've come all the way over here to ask Terry why he's not started his column about us in preparation for this summer's family fun day. Sorry, didn't anyone tell you? Terry's retired. He pulled a notebook towards him and began to scribble something down, pausing every so often to scroll down the web page on his screen. Who did he think he was? Not only talking down to her, but more importantly, dismissing the dogs at the home with such ease. She picked up an envelope from a pile of papers on his desk and read the name. Darryl Thomas, huh? Has nobody explained to you that by taking over someone's job, you are actually expected to do just that? Their job? You are in charge of Terry's column now, and every year, for the past decade or so, he has written about the preparations for the family fun day. He's been highlighting the work we do and been featuring dogs who are ready to be adopted. Pushing his chair away from the desk, Darryl turned and looked at her. Look, Gina, I understand Terry used to cover your story. I'm sure our readers found your work at Wagging Tails.Dog's home riveting. I'm sure it was some real nail-biting, perching on the edge of the sofa stuff. But things have changed. I'm doing this job now, and I get to decide what to write about. Seriously? Didn't he understand how his decision would affect the dog's home? Folding her arms, Ginny tapped her trainer against the cheap grey carpet tiles. You can't do that. We have an understanding with the paper. You had an understanding with Terry. Terry is no longer here. We don't have an advertising budget. We hardly have enough money to cover the bills and food for the next 2 weeks. The column in the paper brings in donations, vendors who want to hire a stall at the family fun day, visitors who spend money there and donate. Okay, I'll look into it. He held his hands up, palms forward. Look into it. It's next month. We need to raise awareness. We need to fill the stalls. Shaking his head, Darryl picked up his pen. I'll see what I can do. Do you think you can get something written in time for tomorrow's edition? As I said, I'll try. That's the best I can offer, I'm afraid. You'll try? Why did she have the distinct feeling the only thing he was trying to do was to get rid of her? Oh, yes, I'll try. Now, if you don't mind, I really do need to get on. I have a meeting with... He looked around the office and then used his pen to point to another journalist a few desks away. That guy. Ginny nodded. Thank you. Bye. Darryl stood up and waved at her sarcastically. Ginny headed towards the stairs, shaking her head as she walked. Time would tell as to how sincere he was being. She'd have to remember to tell Flora. If he really did write a column for tomorrow's paper, they'd likely get an influx of calls asking for details. They'd have to make sure someone stayed within earshot of the phone. Chapter 3. Stepping outside, Ginny pulled her mobile from her back pocket and sighed as the photographs Susan had given her scattered across the ground. How had she forgotten those? She began to gather them up. Fancy seeing you here. Are you stalking me? Ginny looked up. She knew that voice. She'd recognise it anywhere. Jason. Here, let me help. Bending down, Jason reached for a photo. Oh, he's cute. You're still working at the dog's home, then? Ginny plucked the photograph from Jason's hand. How do you know where I work? In fact, how did you even know I was living down this way? She'd thought it odd when he'd first started ringing last week and leaving messages to say he'd moved. Someone must have told him. Who, though? After their relationship had ended and she'd moved down to West Parr, she'd only told a handful of people where she'd been going. Anna, one of the other estate agents she'd worked with at her previous job, her mum, who had emigrated to America the month after she'd left, and her old school friend Mary. She couldn't imagine Anna or Mary telling him where she'd gone. Why would they? And her mum had never liked Jason, had always said he wasn't right for Ginny, too controlling. She wouldn't have spoken to Jason, let alone told him where Ginny was living now. Maybe Anna or Mary had accidentally let something slip, or someone from her old job. Her old boss had always thought highly of him. You know, I hear things on the grapevine. Jason grinned. Right. She didn't know anyone on the grapevine, as he called it. The majority of her so-called friends had been people she'd met through Jason, and they'd swiftly exited her life when they'd split up. I left you a voicemail. I don't know if you got it. I wondered if you wanted to catch up now I'm living down here. Catch up? Really? What did he expect her to say? That she'd love to spend an evening reminiscing over the old times? Would they chat over their starters about the fact he'd cheated on her for 6 months? Would they ponder over the way she had to claw back money from their wedding venue? The fact she'd had to call the bridal boutique and explain between sobs how she didn't need the wedding dress she'd taken so long to choose, and that, yes, she was all too aware that she would lose her deposit. But the topic of him basically chucking her out of their shared house so that he could move his mistress in be kept for dessert? I don't think that's such a good idea. Really? Jason frowned, reaching out to touch her elbow. Ginny took a step back, gripping the photographs tighter. Yes, really. Surely you've not forgotten what you did to me. No, but, well, that was a long time ago now, wasn't it? We're both adults. Surely we can move on. Both adults? Well, yes, they were. Only one of them had a moral compass, and one of them didn't. How is Natasha? Natasha? We split up shortly after you moved out. Ginny opened her mouth before thinking better of it and turned around. I need to go. Ginny, wait, please. Without looking back, she pushed the heavy glass door open and strode back through the foyer of the office building, heading straight towards the stairwell. The sooner she gave Darryl the photographs and could get away from Tresto, from Jason, the better. After all the hurt Jason's affair with Natasha had caused, how could he be so calm, acting as if none of it had ever happened? She swiped at her eyes, taking the stairs 2 at a time. She was better off without him. Him having an affair had been a blessing in disguise. It really had. If he hadn't, they would have likely been married by now, maybe even had a child or 2. And she'd be living with him, sharing her life with him. She shuddered. At least she'd found out what kind of person he really was before their wedding day. Besides, she now lived in the beautiful seaside village of West Parr, had a wonderful group of friends, and a job she loved. First floor. And who did he think he was to assume she'd even want to spend any time with him? In the 4 years they'd spent apart, his ego must have only grown. Why else would he just take it upon himself to presume she'd jump at the chance to even consider meeting up? Second floor. She could imagine what Flora would say when she told her about running into him. And she would. She told Flora everything. Without her mum close by, Flora had stepped into that role, pretty much from the moment Ginny had turned up on her doorstep with her suitcase in one hand and the flyer advertising Wagging Tails in the other. Flora had welcomed her with open arms, and after only a month of volunteering, she'd given her a permanent job, a focus, a way to piece together her heart and rebuild her life. 6 months after that, Flora had helped her find a small cottage to rent in the village. Third floor. Without pausing to catch her breath this time, Ginny pushed the door open and made her way back to Darryl's desk. Short meeting? She asked when she saw him sitting there, still scrolling on the screen. Gina, you're back. Spluttering into his coffee mug, Darryl looked at her, his eyes hooded, guarded. And what can I do you for this time? It's Ginny, not Gina. She threw the photographs on his desk. I forgot to give you these. They're photos of dogs we have ready to be rehomed. Terry featured different dogs, placing a photo of them in the paper with a brief description of their personality, history, likes and dislikes. Likes and dislikes? Darryl nodded. We'd like you to feature Tyler first, please. He's a Springer Spaniel, just over a year old, placed in our care when his family had to give him up due to circumstances out of their control. He loves to play fetch. He'd play all day given the choice. He hates confined spaces. Can be rehomed with other dogs. Ginny frowned. Aren't you going to write this down? It's all in here. Darryl tapped the side of his head. Is that all? What? No, she shook her head. He's well trained and walks on the lead without pulling, which is quite a rarity for spaniels. He's neutered, up to date with his vaccinations, and is generally healthy. Right, healthy. Are you sure you're going to remember all of this? Do you want me to write it down? She reached out for his notebook. Pulling it back away from her grasp, Darryl shook his head. I'll remember. And you've got the date of the family fun day. You'll make sure to mention the dog show too. Both the locals and the tourists love it. There'll be taster classes as well, basic dog training, agility, tracking, hoopers. She counted them off on her fingers. Uh-huh. Darryl picked up a donut from his desk and sank his teeth into it, sugar covering his lips. What was it with men? They were all the same, apart from Percy, of course, and her colleagues Alex and Tim. She shook her head. That wasn't fair. There were plenty of lovely guys in the village. It was only Jason and Darryl she had a problem with. She watched as he set down the half-eaten donut on the plate at the side of his computer before wiping the sugar from his coarsely stubbled chin. Do you even know what hooper training is? Or tracking, for that matter? Grinning, he shrugged. I'm a journalist. Research is my middle name. I can just tell you. I really should get on, you know. Why? Have you got another pressing 2-minute meeting to attend? Raising his eyebrows, Darryl looked at her. Maybe. The feeling was mutual. She couldn't wait to get away from him either. The difference was she cared about the dogs and about what he included in the article, whereas he wasn't even pretending to mask the fact he was opposed to writing the article at all. Right, in that case, I'll let you get to your, important meeting. She took a step away and then turned back. I can tell you don't think this is important, but it is. The family fun day will raise more money for the dog's home than we get through any other event. And for dogs like Tyler, she pointed to his photo, it could be his chance to find his forever family. He's really struggling with the upheaval and complete change of lifestyle. He needs this. Rolling his eyes, Darryl picked up Tyler's photo and placed it next to his keyboard. I'll feature Tanya tomorrow. Tyler! It's Tyler! He could call Ginny by the wrong name. She didn't care. But he needed to remember Tyler's. Tyler. Nodding, Darryl pushed his chair back and once again picked up his notebook and pen, signalling the end of the conversation. Thank you. Turning, Ginny headed back towards the stairwell. All she could do was hope that he'd remembered at least some of what she'd told him. As she walked through the foyer door and out into the sunshine, she pulled her mobile from her back pocket before scrolling through to Anna's name. She'd known Anna for years. They'd both started working at the same estate agents, fresh out of college, and had then moved to the next agency together too. People had always joked that they were twins. She needed to tell Anna who she'd ran into. Hello? Anna's voice sounded guarded, uncertain. Hi, Anna. It's me, Ginny. You'll never guess who I just had the pleasure of running into. The sarcasm slipped into Ginny's voice. Oh, hi, Ginny. I don't know. Jason, would you believe it? The one person I hoped I'd never have to set eyes on again, and he's here. Working, and I assume living too, not 30 miles from where I live. She glanced behind her, suddenly worried Jason would be trying to catch her up. Jason? He's moved down there. Ginny sidestepped around a mother and buggy. Yes, of all the... I've got to go, bye. And that was it. Anna had hung up. Frowning, Ginny looked at the screen on her mobile. She'd really hung up on her. She didn't speak to Anna very often anymore, but when she did, they normally spoke for at least an hour. She must have been busy. Chapter 4. It's okay, Tyler. I'm not cross with you. Ginny kissed Tyler on the top of his head before grabbing another handful of fluff. That was the 4th duvet he'd ripped apart this week. Just you wait. When people read about you in the paper and see your gorgeous picture, you'll have queues of people all wanting to give you a loving home. Tyler nudged his plastic dog basket, clattering it against the wall of his kennel. What are you trying to tell me? Do you want another duvet? I'm not too sure that's such a good idea, sweetheart. How about I try to find you some blankets instead? Super indestructible ones." Ginny laughed as the small Springer Spaniel snuffled up to her, a cloud of fluff sticking to his nose. Gently pulling it off, Ginny looked up as a loud bark seeped through the open windows. More barking and a loud screech for help soon followed. Standing up, Ginny brushed the fluff from her knees. "I'll be back in a minute, Tyler. Let me just see what's the matter with Alex." After closing the door to Tyler's kennel firmly behind her, she ran down the corridor, a chorus of other dogs joining in with the excitement, their barks only seeming to antagonize whatever situation was going on outside. Running out into the sunshine, Ginny saw Alex, who was walking Ralph, a large and very nervous staffy. Her gaze shifted to two other small dogs running, unleashed, around the training garden. "What's going on? Where have they come from?" "I don't know. I was just walking Ralph and they showed up," Alex called above the noise. "You know how nervous Ralph gets, so I can't promise to be able to control him if they get much closer." "I know. Just get him back to his kennel. I'll try to catch these two." She waved Alex away before trying to corner one of the small dogs. "Hey, it's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." "You okay out here, lovely?" Glancing away from the dog, Ginny looked across at Flora, who had stepped out of the reception room. "These two have just appeared from nowhere. I bet someone's thrown them over the gate." Flora shook her head. "I'll go this way, you go that, and we'll try and encourage them to go behind the shed. We'll be able to corner them there, and with a little luck, get hold of them." "Good idea. Why wouldn't they have just tied them up at the gate? For all they'd known, we might use this space for exercising off-lead." Ginny changed direction and, holding her arms out wide, helped Flora to usher the dogs behind the storage shed. "I know, love. I saw poor Alex had a hard time of it getting Ralph away as it was." Flora bent down, barely a metre from the dogs. Some people just don't think, though. They make the decision to dump their dogs, and once they've made up their minds, it's as though all common sense gets thrown out of the window. "That's it. You're going the right way." Ginny slowly inched towards one of the dogs before sighing as it ran between her legs and back out into the courtyard, closely followed by the other one. Pausing, she placed her hands on her hips and watched as the two small dogs began following Ralph's scent towards the kennels. "Don't worry. The first thing Alex would have done is to make sure the door is firmly shut." Flora rubbed Ginny's shoulder. "Come on, let's try again." "That's true. He would have." Alex loved Ralph. He had a special place in all their hearts. He would have made sure he wouldn't be put in any situation where he might get scared and react. Taking a deep breath, Ginny walked towards the dogs again, Flora beside her. "That's it. Go on, back behind the shed." Holding her arms out, Flora ushered the dogs back the way they'd come. "They certainly don't look fazed by this whole experience." Ginny walked towards the dogs, keeping her eyes firmly fixed on them, ready to dart forward and stop their escape. Far from looking meek and scared, the two dogs looked as though they were having the time of their lives. Flora chuckled. "I have a feeling these two might liven things up around here a little." "Ready?" "Yep, ready." "Right, lovely. Shall I grab the one with the pink collar, and you get the one with the orange?" "Okay. On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Lunging forward, Ginny grabbed the dog. "That's it. Well done, little one." They seemed friendly enough. Flora checked the tag of the one she'd gripped hold of. Belle, a cockapoo by the looks of it. "Same here." Ginny looked from Belle to her dog and back again. "They may well be siblings. Let's see what your name is." "Tiger." Flora chuckled as she looked at Belle's collar again. "Oh, you've got to love it when people abandon their dogs and forget the tags have their phone numbers on." Ginny laughed. "Now that will be an interesting conversation." "You're telling me. Let's get these two settled in the empty kennel, and then we'll make that phone call." She picked up the young cockapoo. "Come on, Belle." "You too, Tiger. Shall we find you a new home?" Fussing the dog behind the ears, Ginny stood up, holding him firmly in her arms. Making sure he was facing away from her, she hugged him to her. It was always a little dicey holding an unknown dog, but without a lead on her, she didn't have much choice. We're full now, aren't we? Yes, all the inside kennels will now be taken. I was keeping this last one for a dog from the pound. Yvonne called this morning, begging us to take a Labrador. Labradors are normally easy to rehome, at least. I do hope so. Flora held the door open for Ginny. We could set up the outside kennel. I know it's not perfect, but it'll be better than turning her away. I guess we'll have to. From what Yvonne was saying, we're her last hope. I'll get Susan on the case. I'm sure she'll work her DIY magic and be able to transform the dilapidated outside kennel into somewhere livable, and she should be fine for a while, at least. Besides, we should be getting calls about Tyler soon, so it won't be long until we have one of the regular kennels free. That's true, Ginny nodded. I'll pop out on my break and grab a paper. See what Darryl has written, she said, spitting out his name. I still can't believe the way he spoke to me. But I guess none of that matters if he does a good job of promoting the home. I've still got a good mind to ring up his editor-in-chief and complain. From what you said, his attitude towards you was awful. There's no point. Ginny pulled open the door to the kennel and carefully lowered Tiger inside. That's it. You go and explore. I'll get you both something to eat in a moment. Flora closed the door, Belle's tag in hand. Come on then. Let's see what this so-called owner has to say. I can understand people leaving them tied up at the gate, but to chuck them over. She shook her head. Some people just don't care. No, some don't. But as I always try to say, it's only a few. The majority of people are good. Ginny looked across at Flora. It still surprised her that after 35 years of running Wagging Tails and experiencing firsthand the cruelty some people can